Hi students, we are here to talk a little bit about some of the principles in chapter 19, which is called Earnings and Discrimination. And I'm going to do this over a couple of lectures. So this one will be a little bit longer than the previous lecture. If you're watching this, you should have already taken the chapter 18 quiz that I provided both in the electronic version and in the paper version if you picked up on Monday. And that covers just the issues of labor, capital, and land in factor markets, last week's end of week lecture and this week's beginning lecture. And now we're getting into chapter 19. When we have a big test, it'll cover the all about work topic, which covers 18, 19, and 20. Okay, so there'll be some quizzes throughout, maybe even a double counting quiz at some point, just to keep you on your toes and watching the lectures, watching the videos, keep you engaged. This is an interesting topic today that we're going to cover, so I don't think that will be a problem. And so we're going to get started. And I wish you guys were here. I'm in the SMB classroom on a sunny afternoon, and it does not smell very good in here. It's been sitting shut up and closed, and it's not probably our most pristine classroom to begin with, but it's a little less so after having sat shut up during the week. I wish that you guys were out in the chairs. I'm sad to hear that we won't be returning. I'm sure by now your families have gotten Mr. James' email that he sent out on Sunday. And so we're looking at finishing the year online, but you guys are doing a good job. I'm looking forward to grading your Federal Reserve tests and looking at your current events from last week. I'm enjoying our Zoom meetings, although they're not the same as in person, and I'm praying that in some way, as restrictions lift, even before the end of the school year, that we might be able to get together as a class in some other kind of socially distant venue and still have just a couple of class times together, obviously, aside from graduation and you guys having prom and baccalaureate and all of those things. So we carry on, and we're going to talk right now about wages. So last week we talked about, from a firm's point of view, the number of workers, right? The number of laborers that a firm is looking to hire in a marketplace, and we talked about how they make those determinations. But let's turn our attention to talking about a different topic, and that is the topic of wages. So we're going to start out, okay, by saying that most of the time, wages are equilibrium wages, right? Equilibrium wages. When we say that we're discussing equilibrium wages, we mean wages that meet on the demand and supply curve. In other words, people that are willing to offer, willing to supply, if we're looking at this from the labor market standpoint, the factor market standpoint, people who are willing to supply their labor at a various number of hours and dollars per hour, or in a salaried situation, dollars per year, and demanders in the marketplace, firms for goods and services and structures that are willing to pay. Right? The less they have to pay, the more hours they will be willing to work a laborer. The more that you can make at a corporation, we would assume, the more hours you'd be willing to work. And we call that equilibrium wages. Now, some of what we're going to discuss as we get further into the chapter there are times when the supply and demand market doesn't, this supply and demand equilibrium chart doesn't properly express what's happening. And we call those times above equilibrium or below equilibrium wages. But right now, we're just here to talk about the norm. We're here to talk about how supply and demand set the wage amounts for a laborer. And so if that's true, okay, if we can fairly say that equilibrium is what sets wages, Well, then how can you really make an explanation for the fact that different people make different kinds of money? You know, we started last week talking about probably as you think of your job, you have a somewhat, I hope, realistic picture of what you're going to make into the various careers and jobs that you're thinking that you might enter. And if you're thinking of working Seven Rivers Camp this summer, you're not thinking that that's going to pay you a six-figure income. And if you are thinking about becoming a welder this summer, then you might anticipate that that might make you a whole lot of money. You might have these ideas that are based on what we would call compensating differentials. Okay, so why do people make differing amounts of money? And there are a lot of reasons for this. We're going to talk a little bit about compensating differentials in the terms of how they, what are some specific scenarios, some specific situations in which we'd say, well, that is a compensating differential, or that is a difference, but we can understand that that difference is compensating for some other reality in the workplace. And this can be true even of people who have similar times that they spend in school, degrees, or even physical abilities. So let's give three examples that Manicure uses for compensating differentials. Okay, first one, he talks about coal miners, and he discusses dirty and dangerous work, right? You would imagine that a person who's being asked to go into a difficult situation, a situation that might present some kind of long-term health risk or immediate danger, or uncomfortable working conditions, might receive a difference in salary. He gives that the difference between someone who goes to work, let's say at an office desk, and someone who goes to work in a coal mine. And he would say someone who's a coal miner might expect to receive more wage for the same amount of education or for the same years of experience in a job, because of the dirty and dangerous work. And that's a compensating differential. Okay? A second idea is the inconvenience of work. So, for instance, the night shift. If you make donuts for Dunkin' Donuts, there's a possibility that you might get paid a premium for working the night shift as opposed to the day shift. Now, I'm not privy to their pay structure, but one might imagine that if you're coming in all night as a baker versus coming in during the day, you have this, what people might term a premium pay that's given to you because you're willing to work a shift that most people don't want to. This might take them away from their family, it might inconvenience them, it might take away from their normal sleep patterns. And so night shift work is an example of a compensating differential where perhaps you'll get paid more. When I used to work for Publix a long time ago, there was a compensating differential on Sundays. They had a Sunday pay, and back then, Sunday pay was time and a half. And so if you worked on Sunday at Publix, your hourly rate was time and a half the other days. And then they went to a Sunday premium pay where they paid $1 more per hour on Sundays than on other days. This was something that the company built in to its structure. They recognized that maybe their workers did not want to work on Sundays, and so they built into compensating differential. They said, if you're willing to work Sundays, we're willing to pay more. Certainly right now, you have people who are experiencing compensating differentials because of the situations that they're being asked to work in. Now, obviously, nurses and doctors are examples of these. You've probably heard, and I think one of your parents at least was even talked to about going and working in a more intense medical situation for a greater amount of money for a few weeks, right? That's a compensating differential for dirty and dangerous work. But my brother works for a bank, and he's considered an essential worker. And right now, they've decided that they're paying everyone at the bank more than they normally would for their working hours because of working in these disadvantageous circumstances. The work is really a little different than it was before, but they're being paid for being inconvenienced, or being paid for being afraid, or being paid for working in stressful times, or being paid because the company chooses to do so. And so that can be an example of a compensating differential. I don't know why, but students have had trouble defining a compensating differential before on tests and quizzes. So I want you to make sure that you can give examples, and then I'll give you the book definition before we close out talking about this. Third thing, there can be a compensating differential in the joy, or in the worth, or in the ease, okay, of a job. So the example Mankiw gives, and I think it's a good one, is that a doctor, a lawyer, and a college professor all have to have advanced degrees. Okay, a doctor's got to go get an MD or a DO degree. A lawyer has to go get a JD. And a college professor has to go get a PhD or a theology degree, depending on if they're teaching college or seminary, right? A THM, THD, something like that. But these are all advanced degrees that take them well beyond a master's degree into probably 2 or 3 more years of work, and sometimes a little bit more. So if we're looking at equilibrium wages, and we say, well, there's not that many people in the world that go and get a doctorate degree, whether it's a Juris Doctorate, whether it's a PhD, whether it's a THD, whether it's a MD, not that many people go and do that. And so why don't they all get paid the same? Why do doctors and lawyers make more than college professors? Well, one of the reasons is because college professors have a certain joy, ease, and worth to their professions. Some of this being in the fact that they teach on a school year flow, and so they're certainly usually less busy in the summers than they are in the other semesters, and the flow of their year is certainly different than a doctor. A doctor doesn't just say, oh, well, I'm taking off Christmas break for the most part. People get sick around the year, and so while they may have their office closed on Christmas Day, they don't get a month-long break at the semester. College professors are not working in life and death circumstances. This is not to minimize their job, okay? Lawyers are being asked to take up the defense of accused criminals, or to work very difficult circumstances in presenting before a judge. It can be a stressful job. It's a busy job. You work according to the court calendar and the needs of your client. Whereas a college professor works a very predictable schedule, and they might have actually time to sit and be with students. They might have time to study further in their area. And in a college professor's world, that is prized. In a doctor's world, there's a lot of pressure. Unless you're a doctor doing research work, there's a lot of pressure to keep up the pace with your patients and patient waiting times. And the insurance company is leaning on you for how many patients you're seeing a day, and what your practice might be leaning on you for generating income. Whereas a college professor, if that college professor is seen sitting in their office reading and smoking a pipe, someone might say, wow, they must be a really good professor, right? That's not to say that they're lazy. It's to say that their job offers certain compensating differentials. And in this case, the compensating differential is not the pay, but it is the perks of the job. And so we would say that those things mean the pay is going to be a little different. In general, your college professor is not going to get paid what a lawyer gets paid or a doctor gets paid. Certainly, they're going to get paid more than if they worked at a hamburger stand, and that is because they do have a PhD, okay? So let me give you a good definition of compensating differential. Please write this down in case you don't have it. A difference in wages that arises to offset the non-monetary characteristics of different jobs. So whether that non-monetary characteristic is joy and ease, dirtiness, dangerousness, or whether it is inconvenient hours, the night shift, or difficult circumstances, A compensating differential introduces a difference in wages that offsets those other concerns. So you need to be able to define a compensating differential, and you need to be able to give me examples, as I just did, of what some of them might be. Okay, so let's move on and talk about wages for a second. And when we think about a person's wages, the first thing we want to talk about is what's been invested in a person and what they have sought out that might give them a higher amount, a higher wage than perhaps someone else. And so when we think about what's invested in a person, and we're normally talking then about their education, we refer to this as human capital. Human capital is the accumulation of investments in people. We're mostly talking about education. We can also be talking about on-the-job training. Certainly some jobs require a specific training to that job. You're operating a specific machine, a specific computer program. You're putting together something on an assembly line in a very, very specific way. This is requiring a specific on-the-job training in addition to, or maybe in some cases, apart from the education that a person receives. So in our society, we've deemed education as vital, and we require a K through 12 education, or at least a K through age 16 education for children in the United States, and you must go to school. You must learn how to read. You must learn how to do basic math. There's certain requirements to graduate and to get a high school diploma. And yet we still see that even with compulsory education, we still see the workforce, jobs, employers setting minimums. You probably know that it's difficult to get a job without a high school diploma. It's difficult to even get into the military without one. In fact, I think several branches of the military do not accept a GED anymore in replacement of a high school diploma. And so why is that? And what is it about a high school diploma and the things that you're doing and learning in that seat that make you ready for specific jobs? Are we really saying that a person who has gotten a high school diploma is just absolutely more qualified to be a ditch digger than a person who has not received a high school diploma? Or to be a fast food worker, or to be in other jobs that might be considered unskilled? Why do they still, many of them, require a high school diploma? We're going to get to that in a minute. But first, we just want to talk about the idea of human capital. So let me talk just for a second about a couple of things here. First of all, it's relatively fair to say that you get paid for the human capital that has been invested in you. Okay, and so the jobs that might not require as much specific links to education, to what you learned at school, still fall into a predictable pattern of paying more for more education. And so what we can say is the more human capital that you have accumulated, the higher you're going to be paid. So, is that always true? Well, there's a couple of alternative explanations that we have to consider. Okay, when is it not true that your human capital? What are some cases where human capital is not necessarily winning the day completely? Or what are some things that show a change, all right? And so when we say that skills, okay, skills equal money, is it always true that a person who's more skilled makes more money? Well, no, there are a couple of times when that's not true. So when are some times when the skills don't equal this? I think we can say as a whole that the more skills you have, the more education, the more on-the-job training, the more skills you bring into a workplace, the more that you're going to get paid. But what about times when that doesn't really work? Here's two theories that economists have. Number one is that the growth of international trade has changed that somewhat. That when countries begin to trade with other countries, and one country is the more advanced and developed than the others, when trade opens up and businesses are able to take their business overseas, their manufacturing or their other business needs overseas, even service jobs can now go overseas, where people overseas are answering phone calls, asking customers how they can help them, doing retail for businesses through online marketing, web design, and also through manufacturing jobs, which is probably mostly what you think of when you think of overseas labor. It takes the price of labor down even for your more skilled people. And so if you have a skilled laborer in the United States, but you open up the economy through international trade, and you bring in a very, very large pool of other unskilled, semi-skilled, or skilled laborers, you have just dropped the wage of your home-based laborers. Some people would say this is a good thing. Some people would say this is a bad thing, okay? We're not here right now to talk about if it's good or bad. I'm just trying to get you to understand that if you're skilled in a certain type of computer programming, okay, and you're making a certain amount of money by doing that, but then the computer programming market, the market for where people can get people who can do what you can do, opens up internationally, and now there's 3, 4, 5 times as many total computer programmers in the world with that skill or a near skill, then what you get paid just dropped. It does not necessarily mean they will hire a worker overseas, but it dilutes the total labor pool. And when there are more people that can do a certain skill, then the wage will drop. So that's one reason. Another reason is technology. Technology can also cause a change in skills that are needed. So for example, the skill set that someone needed to be a secretary or an administrative assistant had changed greatly over the past 20 and 30 years. So 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I remember one of my friends was going to go to this secretarial school in Long Island. It was called Catherine Gibbs school, and there you would learn to be somebody's secretary, as today we would call it, somebody's administrative assistant. And one of the things that she would learn there is typing, and she would learn shorthand and stenography, how to quickly take notes. These are skills that you really wouldn't hear anymore, or you wouldn't hear them called those things at least. Today we have much more modern transcription tools available to us. There's voice to text things that are available for people. And so administrative assistants take on a different set of skills. So while before you might have gone to secretarial school and you might have graduated from that secretarial school with just a certain type of certificate, not necessarily a degree, a college degree, but with some kind of recognition of what you have learned there, and then you could go into a place of business and be well ahead of other people who just came in and said, oh, hey, I'm a good organizer, or I'm a good person to work your front office desk, I have experience. Now you have this specific job training. Today, that might not fly, because today's administrative assistants are usually required to have at least some college degree. This is because they work with computer systems. They're expected to deal with multiple and different types of technology, to work with things that you might not consider to be super skilled, but perhaps they're things that you would not have learned in a typical trade school or technical school. But instead, there are things that you would pick up on in college. And so you would have worked in your time in school with Excel spreadsheets, or with helping your boss to create a PowerPoint, or with making sure that you know how to use email applications, or all the things that come with being a modern day administrative assistant. And that also includes dealing with the public, and sometimes dealing with a difficult public. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But from the technology side, more skills are required today than perhaps they were in the past for some jobs. You could probably make an argument that in some jobs there's less skills required than there used to be because of technology as well. And so whatever we say, okay, about the basis of human capital, we know one thing, that the more educated you are, the more money you're going to make. Now, I'm going to make that as an absolute statement, okay? And we're going to understand right away that probably everybody is going to be able to bring up an individual or a person that they know that does not have a college education, or someone who in fact does have a college education and maybe even has a master's degree or a PhD, an advanced degree, that isn't making a lot of money. And we accept that, and there are anecdotal stories of that all over the place. Okay, I'm going to show you one from the Wall Street Journal in just a couple of minutes. So yes, it is true that you're going to be able to bring up people who went to school and have advanced degrees, and they're not working in a field that requires that advanced degree. That is true, okay? And you probably can name people. This is the part where I always bring up when some kid back, 10 years ago would raise his hand and say, well, what about this rapper? This rapper makes X and they didn't even finish high school. Well, yes, there are certainly those examples, and we would be remiss not to mention them. But what we're trying to do is get to an economic reality, okay? Not a storytelling session. And so what we're going to say is that the more education one has, the more one can expect to earn as a general and true principle. Now, we'll get to the other in a second, so hang on if you're coming up with all kinds of arguments to that. Let's just take a look at this for a second. So this is this particular graph is showing 2016. The ones in your text were a little bit older than that, so I went ahead and found one that is from 2016. So here is your salary in tens of thousands of dollars along the bottom, $20,000 a year to above $100,000 a year at the end of the graph. Median household income. So what is the average? Okay, this is not saying every single person with these degrees makes this money. It is not saying, oh, good, if I get a bachelor's degree, I'm going to make $78,000 a year. That is not saying this. First of all, this is household income. And second of all, this is not a guarantee, money back guarantee, online ad. This is a graph to tell us what's generally true. That if you have less than a ninth grade education, then you are going to make $20,000 a year, okay? If your education ended between 9th and 12th grade, that's the furthest you went, you may make, $24,000 a year or less. A high school graduate might have an average median household income of 40. Some college with no degree, so you didn't finish, but you didn't get any kind of terminal degree at college, but you do have college level classwork that gets you quite a bit more. There's the associate's degree, okay? A bachelor's degree, either a BA, a BS, a typical four-year college degree, you can see has gotten you quite a bit further than an associate's degree or a degree with no college. Certainly the space from an AA to here is not as significant as a BA to an AA. And then a master's degree, right? And then your professional or doctoral degrees, when you go and you get an MD or a PhD, as we just talked about. Those tend to get you median household incomes of 6 figures or more. And so we can look at this and we can just understand simply that this is a fact, okay? This is a fact. And I like this particular person. They prepared some notes on the chapter that I've been using to help me as I look through classes and think about how I want to present to you. And somebody said, "Well, that's not what I read in the news." This person said, "Is this what you need in the newspapers where bad news sells?" Okay. And so as I was looking through some different things for today, I just happened across a article from the Wall Street Journal, and I also, this article was actually mentioned in an article that I was reading in a thing called The Fabricator magazine. It's a sister magazine to The Welder magazine, and there's a reason why I was reading those. But since we're talking about the topic of does having a college degree make you money? Here's a Wall Street Journal article. This is from April 21st of 2014, and you guys have probably seen similar articles to this. Welders make $150,000, bring back shop class. In this article on welding by the Fabricator magazine, a magazine for people in specific trades, it talked about how the Wall Street Journal had several articles that talked about these $150,000, $140,000 a year welding and manufacturing and trade jobs, and that they caused this spark of fury with all of these people inquiring and asking and going into the training of being a welder. And some of you might know people who are welders that make quite a bit of money. And so how do we explain that? How do you explain a headline like this, $150,000 to be a welder? Well, why would I go and get a PhD or an MD if I can be a welder and go to WTI and make $150,000 a year? That's more than what's up on the board. Well, okay, let's talk about the reality, all right? First of all, it is true that there are always going to be jobs where you do not have to have a degree to make more money. Rapper is one of those, all right? Many people in Hollywood make more money, and they may not necessarily have gone far beyond high school, or they may even have dropped out of high school. But I wouldn't say that the fact that those exist are some kind of life plan. Okay, the fact that a certain sports hero, sports star, Hollywood actress, or rapper dropped out of school at a specific time in their life does not mean that that's a great path to riches or a great path to career success. Okay, so there are always exceptions. But let's talk about the issue, for instance, of the welder trade. Well, in this magazine called The Fabricator, it talked specifically about the fact that welders' wages, because they anticipate a shortage of this particular skilled work, and it is skilled work. Remember, we just talked about that human capital is about education and also about the instilling of job training. And welding is a certain type of trained work, and that trained work is in demand. But it's not a demand across the board that gets you a $150,000 job. And this article that is for welding people and tradespeople by welding people and tradespeople was giving this caution to say, first of all, the true wage of a welder might be more at a starting point of around $15 to $18 an hour. Now, if you make minimum wage at Publix or at a restaurant, bussing tables or something like that, that's $15 to $18 an hour does sound very, very advantageous, okay? But that does not equate to a $150,000 a year salary necessarily, nor does it mean that you're working full time. And what they said is there's a very big difference. And what they really were saying in the article, although they didn't use this term, there are compensating differentials even within the welding community. All right, and so within the welding industry, this article points out that welders who work difficult shifts, welders who are willing to travel, and welders who work particularly dangerous or exotic locales make far, far more than a welder that's just working in a machine shop down the street from their house. So for instance, this article was kind of was a little bit mocking, and it said, all of a sudden we have all these young people that are saying, oh, what do you want to do in life? I want to be an underwater welder, right? Well, an underwater welder, the article says, makes $300,000 a year. But there are very few underwater welders and very few people with the trade, the skill, the education, the connection to have that job. Okay, so just because you put a welder bumper sticker on the back of your car doesn't mean that you're making $300,000 a year or $150,000. At the entry level of those positions, your pay is going to be far more realistic. And like any job, the more time that you spend in the job and the more experience you accrue, the better. I thought another great thing about that article was one of the things it said is, besides just the skills and the experience, people even in the welding industry are looking for a person who's bright, curious, on time, and shows some interest in being human. right? That's another thing that is a compensating differential. And it's another thing that can get you above equilibrium wages, which we'll talk about later. So yes, welding is a wonderful thing. That article is called "The Truth on Welder Pay." It's in the Fabricator magazine if you want to look it up. It's not our current event this week, but I did think it was a super interesting article to look at. So across the board, we can say that there are these human capital variables. Okay, there's human capital variables going into the idea of what you get paid. Now, maybe you're sitting there and you think, yeah, well, I have some different ideas, right? I have some different ideas about what makes people get paid. And I think that there are certain people who just, are the lucky stiffs of life. And I know that they get a better shake than the rest of us. Maybe you're, sitting here and you're feeling a little, see right, Corona bitter, okay, and you have some ideas and you say, I don't really buy all this. I don't think it has anything to do with the degree you earn or the human capital. I think there's certain people that just, rate better than others in some way. Okay, well, economics does allow us to talk about that. Let's talk about two potential ideas that some people have put out there about explaining why wages might be raised for certain people. Do you ever feel like beautiful people make more money or get the promotion faster or are moving up the ladder of career success and therefore wages in a faster way? Or what about just people who are superstars? What about the person that always wins, right? They're just some kind of superstar at what they do, and they just seem to have this life. They're born under a lucky star, and they're superstars, and they just somehow make more money than the rest of us. Let's talk about these two ideas. They have names, and ManQ addresses them. So first thing we're going to talk about is what some people have called the beauty premium. Now, before we get there, I think that we would say that in any job, okay, before we get into these, specific question marks, we would say that someone's ability, and we would say that someone's effort, and I think we would even maybe go so far as to say chance can also play a role in this. What about ability, effort, and chance? What if you're just better at a job than someone else? What if you are a better bagger of groceries at Publix than any other front service clerk? Maybe you will get paid a higher wage for what you do, or maybe you'll get more hours and you will have an increased salary. What if you're a better teacher, a better doctor, a better lawyer, a better computer programmer than others? Your ability plays into this, okay? And in this, we'll talk about just natural ability. Let's talk about natural ability. There are people who work very hard to get better at their jobs, and there are people who seem to have an innate ability to do a job very well. I bet you can tell, ladies, right, when you go to a new hairdresser, whether or not that person has great ability to do hair, to listen to what you're saying and to act on those ideas and to produce a product, maybe even a product that you didn't exactly say very well or communicate very well. Maybe you brought in a picture and you said, I want it to be like this, but not, and I like this color, but only. And then this person, through their ability, was able to translate this. Were they educated? Yes. Did they have job training? Yes. But I remember going to school with a girl that had no beauty training. She had not done any kind of hair school, cosmetology school, and she would do our hair and makeup for every event that we ever had in college, whether it was an interview or a political thing or a college banquet or a date, no matter what we were getting ready for. This girl would literally have a line of people outside of her door. And I remember on the day that she got married, she had this connection to a local salon, in Sarasota. And so she decided that for a gift to her bridesmaids, and there were only two of us, and it was her, the bride, and the two bridesmaids, that we'd all go to this kind of fancy salon that had these London connections in some way, and we would get our hair and makeup done for the wedding on that day. And so we went in, and these ladies, took us to the back and started doing hair and makeup, and it was kind of frightening what was produced. It was pretty over the top, and none of us really looked like we had wanted to look, including the bride. And it was just, we kept saying maybe apply just a little less, but it was just they had a very heavy hand, and so we kind of walked out of there, and everyone was just kind of staring at each other. And I remember this is the same girl that would do everybody's hair in college. We got back to the church where she was getting married, and she hated what they had done with her hair. And they had done this ornate thing, and she didn't like it. So the first thing she did is she said, take all your makeup off and I'll redo it. She redid her maid of honor, and I was a bridesmaid. She redid both of our makeup. Then she went over, I'll never forget this. She went over, she stuck her head in the sink of the church bathroom, washed out what they had done, and basically just put it up in some piece that she had that wasn't even her original plan, or it went with her wedding headpiece, and walked down the aisle. And she was still a beautiful, beautiful bride. She just had an innate ability. She didn't go to school. She didn't have a lot of human capital invested in this. There are people like that, okay? There are people like that, and there are athletes like that. There are singers like that, and those are realities. And so innate ability, that certainly we would have to say we've experienced it, we know it. Effort is another thing. People put years and years and years worth of effort into the job. Maybe they don't even have necessarily an innate ability, but they've been around cars their whole lives, and they've watched people work on them, and they have spent hours and hours and hours under the hood and putting in time to learning how to be a great mechanic. When I was in college, there was a guy that had no formal mechanical training, but his dad had owned a shop, and his relatives had always worked on cars, and he had an interest in cars, and he had put in the effort as a young boy to learn about how to fix things. And let me tell you, he also had a line out the door of students who didn't have a lot of money and didn't have the money to take their cars to these repair shops, but they would pay him, and he would say, okay, well, I can't get this done for 2 weeks because I got to study, and you were kind of between a rock and a hard place. He fixed my car several times, and he probably charged me $15, $20. But he had an amazing ability that he got through effort and through learning this on his own and applying his mind. That is a skill that one gets through effort. And someday, I'm sure, he got paid what he deserved to be able to do those things, paid for the effort that he put into the job. And what about chance, right? Do you believe in chance? Are we getting too ethereal here? Well, let's take, for example, the company Zoom, right? Before this, everyone's using this example in economics, but it's certainly true that before the coronavirus, Zoom was a developing company with an idea and an application that people could use. But I'll tell you, all of us, right, have been on it, have been using it. And yes, it's had some bubbles and some hurdles along the way in the press, but certainly the chance has looked kindly on the people at Zoom. And so ability, effort, and chance certainly play into what you get paid. But what about these more conspiratorial ideas about beauty and about superstars? Is there such a thing as the beauty premium? Is there such a thing as, oh, well, because someone is particularly attractive, they get some kind of extra pay, or they're paid more for doing the same work? All right, so let's talk about this beauty premium. Who would you hire as your front desk person? All right, would you hire Roz from Monsters, Inc. as your front desk receptionist, or would you hire Emily Blunt, right? And if you say, oh, well, I definitely hire Emily Blunt because she just puts on a more pleasant face to the people coming in, and she represents something that my clients will want to see, or the people coming to my business will want to see, well, then are you guilty of paying someone a beauty premium? And is that a bad thing? Is that okay to do? right? The beauty premium would say people with good looks. And by the way, this goes for both men and women. There are observable pay differences for people that people find attractive. Now, let me tell you something, okay? For every example of an attractive person that you find that gets paid more money, I'm sure you can say, oh, but I know someone really ugly that's getting a lot of money. Again, we're talking about general observable principles. And so people have observed what they call the beauty premium in earnings, and some people might call this discrimination. Is it okay to pay a person a beauty premium? Is it okay for a workplace to say, I would like my front desk person to have a pleasant and attractive appearance, and therefore I'm going to hire a pleasant looking and attractive person? What if you're in the beauty industry, right? What if you're in the weight loss industry? Is it okay to discriminate about the person who works at your front desk and who's the face of your business? Or is that discrimination and it should be not allowed? Well, we're going to get to that when we get to the end of this chapter and we talk about discrimination and we talk about what happens when people do make those decisions. But the beauty premium is an example of an observable difference in wages that doesn't necessarily have to do with human capital in terms of education or job training. We can't just make the statement that everyone is going to make to make the same money. And what about the idea of the superstar phenomenon, right? What about the person who just is the best and seems to have a charmed life and they're good at everything they do and they just, have gold pouring out of everything that they trip over? What about that person that just seems like a successful person and therefore people say, oh, they're going places or they're up and coming, and so they're necessarily given faster track promotions or a higher wage? Is there such a thing as the superstar phenomenon? I would say the answer is yes. These are phenomenons that lie outside of the explanation of human capital. But I still think that we should take them into our discussion of earnings. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about one more thing because I'd like to wrap up this video pretty quickly before it gets too long and you're not patient enough to listen anymore, okay? So we're talking about one more thing, so hang on with me here for a second, all right? So we've discussed the human capital view of, hold on, I'm gonna try to get this thing off, of wages and earning. In other words, other than a few freak things like the beauty premium and the superstar phenomenon, or other than some explainable elements like ability, chance, or effort, we can say that capital, human capital, the investment in education and in job training directly relates to people's earning of wages. All right? But there are some alternative ideas to this. Because you go get a 4-year degree, well, think about that chart that I just showed you. Does that mean that you really somehow are better prepared for the work? What about all of these people that go and get a college degree and they work in an industry or at a job that has nothing to do with what they majored in? This is where people kind of go crazy, angry about liberal arts majors. They say things like, don't major in English or don't major in mathematics or history because there's no jobs there unless you want to teach. There are actually quite a few people that are out there and gainfully employed in something that they love doing who did major in a liberal art area. And there are also people that majored in things like speech therapy or physical therapy or hotel management that aren't working those jobs at all, but they're still gainfully employed and generally supporting themselves and a family. And so that has to bring about, because that doesn't really go with the human capital view. I thought it's about education and job training, then you go and you get trained in this specific thing, and then you get hired in this specific thing, and that's how you make money, and that's how you define success. Well, there's another theory out there, and this theory is called signaling. Okay, so human capital is about the connection between your education and training and the investment that is in a specific thing that you want to do. Signaling is a different matter. In signaling, we talk about what someone's saying, what they are signaling, what they are telling a potential employer, boss, industry by the work that they are willing to put in. Think about that graph that was up a little while ago. When someone doesn't go any higher than ninth grade, or they go 9th through 12th, or they get some college, or they get some AA, why on earth would it make sense that because you took a couple of college classes, you're going to get paid more than if you got an AA? Are you really telling me that you're better at the... No, it's about signaling. Signaling is what you do when you send a message to an employer that, hey, I stuck with it. I finished a degree. I went above and beyond what I needed to do. I have a degree, I have a college degree, I have a high school diploma, I have a specific certificate, I have a PhD, I have a master's degree. I stuck with it. You know what else goes here? Do hard things. Now, I'm not saying that being a ditch digger is not a hard thing, okay? It's a very hard thing. But this is a different kind of do hard things that we can make reference to in the sense of sticking with an advanced degree that costs you time, money, energy, and effort. Now, ManQ does caution us that it does have to make sense. Okay, we cannot go and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a degree that no one's interested in the job market, and that we have very little chance of using and saying, oh, well, by doing this, I'm signaling. Okay, that's not what's being talked about here. But what is being talked about is that you're sending a message to an employer with the type of degree and even to a degree where you get the degree from. Now, okay, I'm going to say some things here that might be a little bit controversial. All right, if you listen to Dave Ramsey, I listen to Dave Ramsey, okay? So if you're a Dave Ramsey fan, or your parents are Dave Ramsey, people, or some of people in your family are working for Dave Ramsey and his ministries and Financial Peace University, don't have them call me, okay? Because I listen to the show, and I think he gives a lot of good advice. But he has a very specific view on college. And he basically says that it does not matter what college you go to. It does not matter what the name of the college is. It does not matter how prestigious it is. That is a waste of money, and you should not take out any loans to go to school whatsoever unless it's absolutely vitally necessary. And he says most people, it's not going to matter where they go to school or what the name of their school is. What the employer is looking at is for a degree that goes with the job, the end. Well, it depends on the kind of job you want, okay? If you want to be a Supreme Court justice, you cannot go to the University of Western New Mexico, which is my alma mater for my master's degree. Let me tell you why I got my degree from Western New Mexico University. Okay, I had graduated from college and planned on going to law school. I got married and had children, and law school seemed like it was something that was not going to happen, at least for some time. And so I debated getting a master's degree. But by this time, we had 3 children. I was starting a charter school in my spare time and still working at Seven Rivers. And I did not have the money or the time or really the ability to drive to Gainesville at night and take classes. And I found out that there was a university called Western New Mexico University in Silver Spring, New Mexico, that was a brick and mortar university. And for me, that's what I wanted. There were lots of online universities like the University of Phoenix. They're all fine and good. But I personally wanted a brick and mortar school that was an institution that I would get my degree from. Okay. And I found out that this particular university had a deal where the New Mexico legislature had passed a law that said that to attract people to go to New Mexico universities, that they would keep the tuition in state for out-of-state residents. So even though I was a resident of Florida, I could get the in-state tuition for my classes for up to 6 credits in the fall and the spring, and then unlimited credits in the summer. So for 2 years, I went to my job, I took care of my family, I helped start a charter school, but in my spare time, I did 6 credits in the fall, 6 credits in the spring, and then probably 9 credits in the summer. because I could get the in-state tuition rate and I finish a master's degree in a couple of years. Well, I wanted to do that because I needed it for some career opportunities that I was looking at, and it was something that was important to me to go and to get a master's degree. And Western New Mexico University had an interdisciplinary degree that would allow me to take a couple classes in education, but the rest of my classes all in political science and history, and that's what I wanted to concentrate in. And so I went ahead and did that. And I was able, thankfully, because of the inexpensive nature, to do that without taking out any loans and maybe just cashing in a life insurance policy, cash value, and paying for it, and got it done, right? And so that was worth it to me. And I was signaling to my employer, and I was meeting the requirements of helping to start the charter school. And it was something that I had always had as a personal goal, okay? Why didn't I go to Harvard? Well, I'm not sure that I would have been accepted at Harvard, but why didn't I go to a more prestigious school? Let's just say that. Let's not. Well, because number one reason, the expense. Okay, there was a program that I was very interested in at George Washington University. And the reason I was interested is because their classes were not click-through classes. They had live professors, and they actually came on and taught, and you had to log on in a synchronous way, not watch it later, but watch it when the professor was there. But the price was easily triple. It was easily triple of me going to the Western New Mexico University. And I checked out their classes, and I checked out their professors, and I said, this is going to be a good education, depending on what I put into it and the reading that I did. And so I made a determination about what kind of signal I needed to send. And to my employers at the time, I did not need to send a signal that I was going to a prestigious selective university. But I did want to send a signal that it was a real brick and mortar university awarding a regular old master's degree. And that I had taken a certain type and level of classwork in order to do this. Now, if I want to become a Supreme Court justice, I'm going to be in trouble with that Western New Mexico University degree. And if you don't believe me, you think, no, that's not how people think. They're very egalitarian. Go look what happened when George W. Bush nominated a personal friend that he knew very well and respected in the law. And I believe her name was Harriet Miers, and she was a Supreme Court nominee, and the press went nuts because of where she went to school. So the people sitting on the Supreme Court have all gone to very, very prestigious institutions of the law, Yale and Harvard, right? And Harriet Miers had gone to, I want to say, I'm going to have to look it up. I want to say it's like the University of Connecticut. It might have been something a tad better than that. I don't remember. But it was not a prestigious law school. And the press and the media went crazy. And they said, well, essentially they said, what is she signaling? Why couldn't she go to a prestigious school? Why didn't she get trained somewhere that's worthy of the Supreme Court? And for that reason and a couple of other reasons, that nomination was withdrawn, and she never made it to the Supreme Court. Now, that's an extreme example. But certainly, if you're looking to go to graduate school at certain places, if you're looking to impress certain types of employers, you're looking to gain access to certain type of programs, where you go does matter, all right? I think what Dave Ramsey's saying about that it doesn't matter is true for a great majority of things. And so the cost certainly has to be counted. Let me say just a couple things in closing as we talk about degrees, okay? I want to read to you a couple things. You're going to be doing a current events article out of this book this week. It's called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. It's really good. It's going to require a little bit of concentration. You won't be reading this stuff, so please listen to these as I close. This is really talking about the importance of leisure in life. And when I do the video to prep you for doing the current events article, I'm going to talk a little bit about the word leisure and what word that approximates in the English, Latin, and Greek language. But it's interesting. And, there kind of has become this new thing now that The only good in education is the career it gets you. The only good in education is job readiness, job training. All the Shakespeare, all the art history, that's a waste, it's fluff, it's garbage. Some people say, oh, it makes students liberal, it brainwashes them. I certainly think there are institutions that are trying to turn people into socialists, maybe even communists, okay? But when we're talking about a college or university education, we're not just talking about what are the classes that are going to make me an extra buck at the office. There are things that are further and greater that people are doing when they're signaling or when they're receiving a college degree. And in fact, there are investments in human capital that are above and beyond how it pays out at work. I want to read you a couple quotes from here. I'm not going to make any commentary on them because I'm out of time and this is a 60-minute video. Let me just leave you with some of these, and I would encourage you to run back the video and listen if you get a minute. All right. First two things are just in the idea of that there can be a point in which our hard work, okay, our rat race, our getting on the mill and just getting the next grade, getting the next credit done can be a bad thing. So I just want to read, I think there's such wisdom in here. He says, if knowing is work and exclusively work, then the one who knows only the fruit of his own subjective activity and nothing else. There is nothing in his knowing that is not the fruit of his own efforts. There is nothing received in it. And when we look in the face of the worker, it is the traits of effort and stress that we see becoming more pronounced there, so to speak, permanently edged. It is the mark of absolute activity, which Goethe said makes one bankrupt in the end. Talking about the idea that there are some things that you can do with your life to earn the next credit, the next grade, that don't exactly produce what you were particularly hoping that it would do. You know, I called this thing in my notes on the side of my book, do hard things plus, right? Our core value, but with a little bit of an addition on the end. Listen to this. It says, effort is good. The essence of virtue consists more in the good than in the difficult. When something is difficult, it is not for that reason necessarily more worthwhile. It must be difficult in such a way as also to be at a higher level of goodness. In other words, you can take a harder class, a more elite class, go to a more elite school, associate with a more elite group or team, but miss the goodness in trying to do hard things just for the sake of it. Certainly this says, do hard things, but do them for the reasons of goodness. The author talks about a specific writer who had a very flat view of life and basically said, we need to get everything out of our way except hard work. It says he had no feeling for cultic celebration, right, for holidays. He preferred attacking these with his enlightened wit. Oh, I don't celebrate holidays made by Hallmark and corporations that are just looking to take my dime. I just live another day. I go to work on Christmas because it makes me an extra buck. He was all-musical, a foe of the muses. Poetry only interested him for its moral content. He felt no responsiveness to Eros and said he would like to kill Aphrodite. As a flat realist, he had no belief in immortality. What really matters, he says, is to live rightly on this earth. This collection of character traits appear almost purposely designed to illustrate the very type of the modern workaholic, right? A person who works, but for what? Okay. I am going to wrap up with, hang on a second, there's a lot of good things that I want to speak about, but let me wrap up with these, okay? I'll wrap up here, I promise. All right, so here's the justification, right, for a university education. If we are speaking about the place and justification for philosophy, then at the same time, we are speaking no more and no less about the place and justification for the university, for academic education, and for education in the genuine sense, in the sense in which it differs from and transcends in principle all mere career training. Training is distinguished by its orientation towards something partial and specialized in the human being, toward one section of the world. Education is concerned with the whole. Whoever is educated knows how the world as a whole behaves. Education concerns the whole human being, insofar as he is capable of the whole, able to comprehend the sum total of existing things. The question is this: can the world of a man be exhausted or reach its end in being the working world? Can the human being be satisfied with being a functionary, a worker? Can human existence be fulfilled in being exclusively a workaday existence? Today's architects of the total work world would have to answer yes, but people in the liberal arts would answer no. And lastly, it should go without saying that not everything that cannot exactly be categorized as useful is useless. I want you to think about that when you're picking out your classes for next year. Some of you might already be at that point where you're creating a class schedule, and I'm not saying that you should waste money and time, but what I am saying is that not everything has to be connected to your earnings. There also is a part of being a human and a Christian that goes beyond just your job. And so we'll be reading a little bit of this when we talked last week about the trade-off between leisure and work. I'm going to use that as a current event. You're not going to be reading that section. I'm going to choose another section for you. So thanks for your listening. This was a little bit of a long one. We'll keep going this week with one more short video for the current event and then one more long lecture, and we'll be wrapped up. All right, thanks. Have a good day.